Today, I'm delighted to welcome Piyush Mehta, Chief Human Resources Officer at Genpact, to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Piyush, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on as a guest. Before we get into the conversation, could you please give listeners a brief introduction to you and your role at Genpact, and maybe a bit about Genpact as well?
Thank you, David. Really appreciate your having me on this program and giving me an opportunity to share our journey with our listeners. I work for Genpact. We are a professional business services company. Roughly about 120,000 people at last count across 30 plus countries. I'm based out of India, which is where a large part of our employee group is. And, the balance of the leadership team of Genpact is a virtual leadership team, which is pretty much across the world where our clients are, really close to them. In terms of my background, I have been CHRO at Genpact for the last, I want to say I'm counting now. It's 17 years of being in the same role, and I've been 21 years with this company. Joined them when we were much smaller and a part of the General Electric company. So I've had the good fortune of being a part of the journey which this company has had, to being a part of GE, to becoming an independent company, which was held by two private equity investors. Then we went public on the New York Stock Exchange. Along this whole path, we've grown to roughly under $5 billion of revenue and about $8.5 billion of market cap. I've been a career HR person. Nobody else wants me. So I've been in HR for a really long time. I started my career with Unilever and then went to work for PepsiCo. So had an opportunity to work across different kinds of businesses and in different geographies, till I decided that I wanted to come back to India because, this is where the action is, that's where the growth is. And that's where the maximum opportunity to support the business from a talent perspective will be. And I have to say that really benefited from that decision.
No, that's good. And I'm sure plenty of other people would want you, Piyush. It's fascinating that you've obviously been 17 years there at Genpact as a CHRO. I'd love to hear just your thoughts really on how the role of the CHRO has changed maybe over that time, because there does seem to be a significant change if we look globally around at that. And also, during that time, Genpact has scaled considerably, hasn't it, since it was spun out of GE Capital. So love to hear your thoughts about how, the CHRO role has changed full stop, but also how it's changed at Genpact, I guess, as you've grown as an organization.
Yeah. So, David, I'll tell you, this is my fundamental thesis as well, based on my learning at Genpact and in the HR function. I actually don't think the role of the CHRO has changed fundamentally ever since I started my career in HR. Okay. I think the needs are pretty much the same, which is, make sure that the organization has top quality talent at the right place and at the right time. And then find a way to enable that talent to be able to stay on in the company and continue to build that talent engine. I don't think that has changed ever since I started working. What has changed, to the point that you're making, is the context in which a lot of us do our work. Okay. What has changed is the influence that data and technology has had. What has changed is the influence which, the pandemic, the different bouts of the pandemic had on, hybrid work and remote work, and therefore the implications on culture and so on and so forth. But, therefore, the tools available to us as HR professionals and as business professionals to fulfill the talent needs of the organization have become more and more sophisticated, if you will. The pace of that change has become faster, if you will. But the fundamental needs remain the same. So if I step back and think about, what are fundamentally people looking for? What do they come to work in an enterprise for? Or what do they come to work at Genpact for? It is, in my view, four reasonably simple things. Number one, what is the company they're going to work for? What's the purpose of that company? What's the culture of the company, etc. Number two, what is the quality of leaders and what is the quality of manager that an individual works with? Okay. The third is, what are the rewards which that individual will get? Then that rewards can manifest themselves in financial rewards, but other rewards as well. And then the fourth one is, what is my career going to be like? Which includes the quality of work that I do, the kind of people I interact with, what's the learning and development that I get, all of those things. Now, these four fundamental reasons why people come to work, in my view, have not changed. The context, however, of this has changed based on, what I talked about earlier, advances in technology, pandemic, so on and so forth. And some of the implications of that are the half-life of skills now is possibly 3 to 4 years. Okay. So the pace at which skills are becoming irrelevant and relevant, and therefore, that has changed. The hybrid plus remote environment has created, I think, a lesser level of anchor, which organizations have to employees or employees have to organizations. The swipe left, I reject, swipe right, I accept kind of environment has happened. Employee experience has become hugely critical, and well-being has become very important. Okay. In all of these changes, technology has dramatically enhanced the way in which we can better fulfill those fundamental needs of employees. So, that's kind of a long answer, but it's my fundamental thesis that, HR needs of organizations are not very complicated. And it's very easy to get lost in all the concepts that come out, which are flavor of the week, flavor of the month, if you will. And I think to stay anchored in, this is what we will promise to our employees, or this is what we will endeavor to provide to our employees, and using that as the North Star to navigate for the function becomes hugely important. Because otherwise what happens is functions, HR functions, David, run the risk of, becoming an end in themselves. And that's, if I were to step back and say, at what point of time do I see HR organizations with the highest credibility with business? It's when they're able to create a very simple North Star which helps satisfy business needs and not complicate things to flavor of the month.
No, that's a really good point, Piyush, and I think it sets up the conversation nicely, because we're going to dive into some of the great work that you've been doing at Genpact around enhancing employee experience, which I know is a real passion topic for you. And I know I met one of your colleagues, one of your team, Praful Tikku, at People Matters in India, all the way back in 2019, and he was talking about some of the work that you were doing then around employee experience, using data and technology to enhance that. You've talked to it a little bit, but we're probably living in, again, depending on where we are in the world and depending what skills that we're hiring for as well. But we're living in what is probably mostly a candidate-driven market. Employees have pretty high expectations about their experience at work. You talked about well-being there being very important. You talked about the opportunity for career mobility as well. What are your views on how employees can attract and then retain the best talent and provide a great employee experience, I guess?
Yes. So, David, wonderful that you met up with Praful. He's an absolute rock star. We've been blessed to have him be our, chief data scientist for the people function for the last 4 years. And I think we went down that path reasonably ahead of time, and that has benefited us hugely because the the creation of that team helped us build a couple of tools which I think are game changing for us. Having just said that, I do want to say that in full humility, that we are very proud of what we've done, but by no ways have we solved for world hunger. We are still on a journey. This is part of
Yep.
part of our learning as we go along. So I do want to say that there's lots still to be done. It's not like we are done and sealed and over. Okay, so with that background, look, I think as we step back and think about employee experience, it becomes hugely critical across the approximately 120,000 employees that we have, and since we are growing at a reasonably fast pace, it means we are adding lots of new members to the Genpact family every day. And therefore, that consistency of experience becomes very important. And that starts, David, with a very clear articulation of what our purpose is. What do we exist for as a company, which is the relentless pursuit of a world that works better for people. Okay. And that's the common North Star to which the 120,000 people navigate to. That's the common purpose to which our culture is, around which our culture is built. And therefore, that provides a unifying experience to all employees. Now, as we think about employee experience, leading from the purpose to our ways of working, there are two or three tools, and these are not really tools in themselves, but ways of working that I'd love to touch on. Actually, four of them. So I'll start with Amber. You referred to it briefly. Amber is our engagement tool. It measures employee engagement across the company based on an AI driven chatbot, okay, which by definition of being AI is intelligent. It allows us to engage with our 100,000, 120,000 employees on a real-time basis, okay? And therefore, at any point of time, is feeding us back a pulse of how employees are feeling. In addition to that, it's also providing us a more nuanced view on if an employee is highly engaged, why is she highly engaged? If an employee is not highly engaged, why is she not highly engaged? And therefore, it's a call to action for us to make sure that that we act on what Amber brings us back. Now, the way it provides that nuance is based on initial responses. Amber then asks questions to the employee which are customized to that employee's early responses. And that's where the AI part of it comes in. The machine learns constantly and gets smarter and smarter as we do more and more of these engagement interactions. Actually, each interaction is about 2 minutes, okay? But the amount of data and insight that provides us is, as you can imagine, we are polling all our employees at least once a quarter. We also want to make sure that there is no survey fatigue. So we are polling employees once a quarter. It allows us to actually go to employees at different milestones. So for example, for someone who joins the company, they will probably have more frequent check-ins with Amber than someone who's been with the company for 5 years or 7 years. So it allows us the flexibility to be able to do that. Now, one of the things that was very clear to us is that someone who engages with Amber is 2x as likely to stay with the organization as someone who doesn't. So, there is a clear and a massive linkage with retention as with engagement. And therefore, you can imagine the power of this tool in being able to navigate employee sentiment. It became really important for us for example, during COVID, when one of the things employees told us very early was the need for empathy and the need for well-being came out loud and clear way before it became documented in various parts of HR and pandemic literature. So it allowed us to respond with a bunch of initiatives, including 24/7 counseling lines, including a bunch of other initiatives around well-being. And that's kind of one of the benefits that we've had from Amber. Now, interestingly, David, this is so important to us that the top 150 people of the company, their bonus plans are driven by 2 financial metrics and 1 engagement metric, which is the Amber score. So the bonus pool for our CEO, myself, and 150 other top leaders of Genpact has 3 metrics that determine the outcome of our bonus. One of those is our Amber score, which is a multiplier of the engagement score and the response rate. Okay, that's how critical it is. It is for us that it's been in place for the last 3 years. So that's about Amber. The second part of it is genome. Now, I started with saying that how careers develop is one of the 4 most important reasons people come to work. And one of the important part of careers is learning that happens on the job and otherwise. And the platform through which we deliver this, we call this Genome. It is 4 years back, we took a decision to go entirely virtual in all the learning that we provide. Hard for an organization which has a fair amount of momentum and a huge amount of focus on learning and development in the classroom to make that switch, fully supported by our CEO. The entire thought process behind Genome was built in partnership with myself and our Chief Innovation Officer, who dedicated himself to just working on this. So think about an organization which has committed 2 of its CXOs full-time to building its learning philosophy, platform, and entire approach. Now, Genome was built on the premise that information is available freely to the entire world now. It is a knowledge economy, but contextualizing that information for the benefit of an enterprise becomes very important. Contextualizing that knowledge becomes very important. So think about conflict management as one area to learn in, and I'm just using that as an example. The concept of conflict management in a B2B enterprise like ours, where we are dealing with clients, for example, on a win-win solution, becomes very different from conflict management in a B2C environment. And therefore, that the significance of that contextual learning. So we basically picked up in a very agile way at that point in time 50 skills that we thought were important for the company. Okay, we didn't spend months in trying to discover this. In fact, we spent 2 days in figuring out what those 50 skills are, and we probably got 80% of those right and 20% of those wrong. We didn't care about the 20% wrong. What we cared about was being agile and fast in the way we did it. So we identified 50 skills, and that's a big learning, by the way, saying don't look for perfection. The world is moving too fast. Get it 80% right and move and use a product mindset where you keep refining the product as you keep moving on. So we picked those 50 skill sets. We went across the organization, simple email and Excel to 2,000 people, saying rate yourself on these 2,000 or on these 50 skills. 2,000 people came back and rated themselves on a proficiency scale of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We picked from that skill set those who are highly proficient on those 50 skills, and then we used a concept called organization network analysis to figure out who are the go-to people in the company for those 50 skill sets based on metadata of email. Okay, now you have individuals who've self-rated themselves, and you have organization network analysis data which tells you who are the rock stars in those particular 50 skills. We took those people who were overlap between their self-rating and organization network analysis, appointed them master gurus in the company for those 50 skills. Their job was to be the gurus for those 50 skills in the company. Now, they would curate material off the web. They would customize it and contextualize it to the company. They would run seminars. They would do all kinds of things to be able to promote. 25% of their scorecard was weighted to promoting learning. And then we built the whole ecosystem around it, reward and recognition, CEO town halls, all of that stuff. Today, David, to cut a long story short, we have 10 million hours of learning that has happened on that platform. We have 40,000 active users every month on Genome. And in my view, it has become the new way of working in Genpact in terms of the way we think about learning and development. So, that's on Genome. In all of this, we partnered with the MIT Center for Collective Learning. So there was a lot of expertise that went in. The platform that we built Genome on is, again, is driven by AI. Therefore, for example, if, I get onto the platform and I put my career aspirations and my role on it, Genome has the ability to come back and tell me, Piyush, you may want to think about this skill. You may want to think about getting onto that channel. You may think about doing the following thing. So it is iterative and it is learning all the time. The third one is our internal marketplace, Talent Match, which takes the people who are upskilled by Genome and marries them to open jobs. Okay. Our philosophy has always been, David, that wherever possible, try and grow people internally as opposed to buying skills from the market. So think about, at this point of time, our goal is to move 45,000 people across roles every year. Okay. More than, as we speak, 17,000 people have been able this year to find roles through what we call our talent match, which is our internal marketplace. So the ability to match skills with jobs, again, is where technology and analytics comes in. And then finally, a really interesting tool called the water cooler, the virtual water cooler. This is designed in partnership with Microsoft. Fundamentally, what happened during COVID and the pandemic was that people weren't hanging around and having corridor conversations because people weren't hanging around together. And what that did, what it told us was that there are certain people with which all of us have strong ties at work. These are the people I will maintain my connect with in any case, whether I'm working remote or not. But there are those weak ties, people I interacted with at the water cooler, people I interacted with just walking the corridor. That didn't happen anymore. And there is a very important need to be able to ensure that those weak ties are quote unquote strengthened. And the virtual water cooler basically again looked at metadata of email traffic and came back and said that, Piyush used to interact with David once in 2 months. By virtue of working remote, that interaction is not happening. And therefore, the virtual water cooler will get into our calendars and will schedule a 15-minute shoot the breeze conversation between David and Piyush.
Yep.
So, these were the 4 specific things that I wanted to talk to you about to give you an example of how we've been able to focus on experience at this time of transition. And again, the important thing is we didn't try to do 200 things. We probably tried to do 6 things. We failed in 2 and we stayed with 4.
No, really impressive. And I know this is something that listeners are going to really enjoy hearing because the adoption and the take up of these tools is incredible. And number one, the fact that you bake in, engagement score into your top 150, that kind of sends a clear message to the rest of the company that engagement is important and people's bonuses depend on it. the genome thing is fascinating. We're definitely going to talk about a bit more about that. But the fact that you've got a third of the organisation using it on a monthly basis is pretty impressive. Was very impressive, in fact. The talent match, obviously, talent marketplace is something that we're increasingly talking about as an industry. We're recording this in May, so people are listening. So you've already had 17,000 people, in the fifth month, by the fifth month of the year, that have had some job mobility from this. So you're well on to your target of 45K by the end of the year. And then the virtual water cooler as well. So I've got a number of follow-up questions on this, Piyush, which you can probably talk to one or more of those four sort of tools that you've taught, or initiatives that you've talked about. Obviously, you probably know me well enough to know that I'm going to ask the first question about analytics. What role? I mean, you've talked to the technology. A lot of this is technology. You've talked a little bit to some of the techniques that you've used around organizational network analysis as well. But what role has people analytics and the people analytics team maybe played in all these initiatives?
It's hugely critical. Okay, and David, I mean, I think one of the benefits that we've had is fundamentally we were a company that grew out of Lean and Six Sigma when GE was making the transition into Lean and Six Sigma. Now, one of the things that we made mandatory was for any promotion in the HR function or any other function, you had to be Six Sigma certified. So I am a green belt in Six Sigma. And if you ask me about all my certifications, that's the one which I'm most proud of, and that's the one I benefited the most from. But think about an organization where I have 1,000 people in HR, and I'm only talking about HR right now, but 1,000 people in HR, of which anyone who's above entry level or anyone who's gotten promoted by definition is Six Sigma certified. So that, I think, in some ways teaches us to think based on process, based on data, and based on therefore hard facts. Okay, I think that that fundamental foundation becomes very important. And by the way, that's true for our entire organization. Last year, we decided that data and analytics 101 is hugely important for any employee in Genpact. Okay, 75,000 people are now trained in Data Bridge, which is our Data 101 program. So, that creates a common currency in which we all engage and talk. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is this function is not treated like an advisory function. We are part of business. So, a few times when we go to external forums and hear discussions about how HR can get a place at the table, our people sort of blink and say, really? I mean, that's new to us because, business has always seen the ability to hire, the ability to train, and the ability to retain as a fundamental business competitive advantage. So we've always been in the room as opposed to having to fight for having a place at the table. Now that counts for a lot. Okay, and I gave you one example. Think about the investment made in learning when the CHRO and the chief innovation officer for 1 year are dedicated to building our learning framework. Okay, now our chief innovation officer also had the mandate to work on products for the company. But we said, no, we're going to focus on learning and development because it is the most important thing for the future. So I think the organization's commitment to the people agenda as being very fundamental to its strategic objectives makes a difference, because we don't have the fight for resources more than any other function. Obviously, there is optimization that needs to happen, but my CEO spends 40% of his calendar on people interactions. He's based out of London. Like I told you, we are a virtual organization. I probably end up talking to him, if not every day, every alternate day, for at least 45 minutes on the people agenda. My leadership team, which is my peers, the business leaders, each one of them, we end up talking probably a couple of times a week, because that's how important it is. Now, all of these sound transactional, but the point I'm making is that it ends up playing a very important role in defining and in bringing alive the talent agenda of the organization. Now, stepping back, your question to me was less about that, but more about people analytics and technology in the investment. All of this has enabled us to be able to make those investments upfront. So Tiger is our CEO. You talked about Praful. He's our chief data scientist for the people function. Praful and Tiger interact on an ongoing basis, sometimes with me and sometimes without me. So right now, as we are thinking about refining our generative AI proposition, okay, Praful and Tiger are having a back and forth. Okay, now that's the CEO of a $8 billion corporation and our lead data scientist in the HR function. Okay, so that provides visibility, that provides front and center positioning of what we need to do on this stuff, which is why, think about, so have they played a critical role? They've played absolutely a mission critical role in our, all the tools I talked to you about, whether it's organization network analysis, we've been doing it for 5 years. Genome, we started 4 years back. Amber, we started 4 years back. We would not have had the benefit of all of this if we did not have that domain. But the important thing, David, here is that domain in itself, on its own, will fail if we don't marry it with the context of what the business need is.
And that's interesting, Piyush, because when we did some research at Insight 222 last year into what leading companies do with people analytics to be successful and add business value, as you say, we saw that the senior person in people analytics, i.e. Praful's peers, were interacting regularly with the CFO and at least once a year with the CEO. But it sounds like Praful is interacting a lot more with Tiger than maybe most other, well, pretty much all other heads of people analytics or equivalent role. And actually that leads to the next question, really, which is, and I'd love to talk to this because I think clearly HR is a business function at Genpact. It isn't always in organizations, but it clearly is at Genpact. When you think of the initiatives around Amber, around Genome, around Talent Match, and even the virtual water cooler, how have these initiatives and the data that you get from it, how's that helped to drive some of the performance of Genpact itself, the organizational performance?
Sure. So, first is it impacts the money we make personally. I talked about our, bonus program and engagement metrics determining that. But more importantly, David, think about an organization of 120,000 people. The moments of truth in our organization where employees are interacting with customers and end customers of our clients are very, very high. And while, my reference to bonus was partly serious and partly facetious, at the end of the day, the growth of the company totally and entirely depends on the engagement and the skill levels of those 120,000 people. And in a competitive world like we have today, our clients will take their business elsewhere if they're not happy, just like our employees will take their services elsewhere if they're not happy. And therefore, our view to performance actually is hugely fundamental in saying that there is a direct transfer function between engaged and capable employees and the existence of our company, whether you look at, revenue, margin, EPS, whatever metric you want to take, client satisfaction, we have no doubt that there is very direct correlation. And the fact that we've been able to grow to the 120,000 employees or to the, $8.5 billion market cap is pretty much completely driven by that. So I don't think we have any doubts in our mind. Now that's on the macro goals or the bigger goals, if you will. So many other things. So many insights come back to us every day through Amber. This manager is great at managing teams. He or she has had a consistent track record of engaged employees for the last 2 years. This manager is not so great at managing teams. Therefore, can we find a way to provide input through genome on people management to that particular manager so that he or she comes up to median performance? When you have 15,000 supervisors, this kind of data and analytics becomes far more powerful than word of mouth. And when you have to build scale, think about, during the pandemic, I talked about, some of the feedback we got on the need that people have for well-being and the need for empathy, and therefore how you want to turn the dial on that kind of stuff. So these are just two examples of, driving performance. But at the end of the day, the biggest piece on this is, and this is again, I started talking a little bit about my own philosophy on this. Business growth is the most important thing for people growth. If your business is growing, everything else will take care of itself. And the transfer function from people engagement to that is, in my view, very, very powerful.
Yeah, and what would you say, Piyush, too? Because we see companies that are making the link between engagement and talent outcomes, such as retention and mobility and everything else. But what you've done, obviously, is you've taken it a step further. You've connected it to business outcomes such as growth and profit margins and all the other financial metrics, but also customer outcomes as well. What would you say to companies that are maybe struggling to make that final step? How do you do it so successfully at Genpact? It's clear that you have a very close relationship with the CEO, and it's clear that Praful, as your kind of senior people analytics leader, also has a significant relationship with Tiger. That's one of the ingredients, I guess. What are some of the other ingredients that you would say help you to do this?
Like I said, it started with, we benefited from being a part of an organization which at one point of time had great people processes. Okay. It's not fashionable to say that anymore, but I will tell you some of the tools and processes that existed in the GE system, and we grew out of that system, were huge. Look, I'd love to say the business loves us because, we are a great HR team. But, I don't think that's the driver. I think the business loves us because they know how important the talent agenda is. They own it as much as we own it. And, we are enablers for the business and the business are enablers for us. Now, that kind of culture, David, is not established overnight. I mean, I don't have a simple recipe for suggesting that gets done. In our case, I think we were fortunate that we, in some ways, many things came together and that happened. Okay. But if I'm to step back, I would just, I think first of all, it's incumbent on HR teams to be very clear about what their reason to exist is. Our reason to exist is not to come up with the next fancy tool or to, spend, this is my view, again, it could be controversial. I could have spent 9 months in figuring out what are going to be the most important skills 4 years from now. I could have done competency research. I could have done, all kinds of stuff. Jenny and I just sat down and used common sense and said, let's spend our time and effort in executing this damn well rather than trying to make a perfect design. And business likes that. They like the fact that we respond fast. They like the fact that we are iterative in the way we think. They like the fact that we don't want to be defensive and say, our model is perfect. So all of that thinking, I think, becomes important. I would say have a purpose. That's very important for an organization. I'd say focus on the basics. In my view, those four basics are super critical. Okay, and I'll talk to them again, just to make sure. The purpose of the organization, the quality of leaders and manager, the rewards and the career. Focus on those and leverage everything to be able to do that well. I tell people in my team, every year you have a scorecard, but in that scorecard, do what you need to do to take care of the scorecard. But do one thing so well that it is your legacy for that year. People remember you for that. Don't try and do 25 things because we'll not be able to scale them.
Yeah. Some good guidance there, Piyush. Going to talk a little bit about technology now. You mentioned that you're already that Praful and Tiger are already talking about generative AI. So I'm going to link that one if that's okay. So obviously there's a lot of press around HR technology. There's a lot of investment in the area. There's new names emerging all the time. Some of the big players got a huge market cap on them. What are your views on how many tools, doesn't need to be a number, but how many tools an HR function should use to support their function? And the little addition there, in terms of generative AI, how do you think that's going to impact ways of working, perhaps, but also the ways we deliver HR to our employees? And also, how are you thinking of using? What are your earlier thoughts around how you're thinking of using it at Genpact? Because obviously you've been using AI for a long time in HR, which many organisations haven't. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that area.
Yeah, David. So, to your point, this is not new for us. We've been down this path before. We've been down, again. If you were to pick up what's being said in the broader ecosystem, even when AI came out, people said jobs are going to go away. It's going to, the reality is, I'll give you, going back to our example of Amber, our engagement tool. Yeah, sure, the number of people running the engagement tool came down, but the number of people we needed to act on the insights, which came out from Amber, actually increased. And therefore, we got huge benefit from it. Think about Genome, the 10 million hours of learning or the 40K learners every month. Yeah, sure, instructional design went out of the window. Classroom training went out of the window. But, the number of people who are helping us with analytics and insights and, gurus and master gurus in that learning process has just multiplied by 10 times. So I think the impact of technology is actually very profound. It is, as has been said famously, overstated in the long run and overstated in the short run and understated in the long run. I would say the same thing for generative AI. We are very excited about the opportunities it holds for us both as a business and within the HR function as well. I think there are going to be some very profound implications of a very different scale than what happened when people went down the RPA path. I think this is very different. Lots of things to be discovered, lots of people talking about potential downfalls as well. But that's true of any development in technology. We see massive application. I'll give you 2 or 3 examples that we are working on as we speak. Take the example of 15,000 frontline supervisors. Today, if they have a challenge in managing their team, they either go to Genome or they go to their supervisor and say, I have X person in my team. Tomorrow, you can have a simple 101 supervisory effectiveness Q&A built into a generative AI model. Very powerful. Think about entire curricula built around channels. So I talked to you about, as an example, take AI or take conflict management as 1 or 2 skill areas of those 50 skill areas that I talked about. Curating and building that material for a guru would take anywhere between, I'd say, 40 to 50 hours. and then you build quizzes around it, another 10 hours. Generative AI can do it in 2 hours based on a demo I saw yesterday. Okay. Very powerful implications of what you can do with that. So, much has been talked about using it for job descriptions, so on and so forth. So I think the implications are massive. Again, what is important is that it's important not to, it's easier said than done. I would rather not be deer caught in headlights syndrome with 25 things I'm trying to do. I will go back to those 4 fundamental things that I talked about, and I would pick 2 use cases in each of those 4 fundamental things. And I would assume that therefore, 2 use cases in each of those 4 is 8. I would be totally fine if 3 or 4 failed and 3 or 4 succeeded. But the 3 or 4 I would pick would be those which allow me the ability to build scale around it. Not just the sexy stuff, but the hard scale ability to impact 100,000, 120,000 people on a consistent basis and make a meaningful difference. Does that mean that this will not have a shelf life? Of course it will have a shelf life, but a more sustainable shelf life is the way I would think about it.
No, that's really interesting. And one more question before we get to the final question, the question of the series, Piyush. You talked about there, you said, 2 use cases in each of the 4 areas that you've talked about, purpose obviously being one of those, 8 use cases. And you said you wouldn't mind if 3 or 4 of those failed, but 3 or 4 of those succeed and you scale. Can you talk to that kind of thinking? Because I think in HR, when I speak to a lot of your peers in other organizations, there is definitely this fear of failure. And you've got a very different approach, like you did with Genome. The 2 of you were in the room, you're picking 50 skills. You said it's got a 80% right, 20% wrong, and obviously you can change those. It was about getting something out there that people could use a bit quickly. How do you breed that mindset into people, not just in HR but across the business? Because I'm guessing that's something that's a part of the culture at Genpact.
Great catch, David. So it's actually one of the if I were to pick our statement of culture, which is built around a concept called CI square, it's one of the key tenets of CI square, which is fail fast. Now, what we're trying to say here is, it's okay to take risks. It's important to take risks to learn, but it's important to not continue to, build on something just because there is ego behind it and because we picked it once. Because the world around us is changing too fast. Sometimes these are not within our control. And therefore, our CEO talks about this often. It is folklore in Genpact to say, the term fail fast is pretty much understood by most people in the company. What we don't like is to not do anything for fear of trying or fear of failure. But what we also don't want is for people to continue to push an agenda because of the fear of failure. Because, in today's interconnected world where everything is interdependent, the reasons for failure may not lie internally. And therefore, it's fine to do that. And to your point, therefore, I say that's a great catch because it is a fundamental part of our culture. And we are totally okay with that.
No, I think it's really good. And I think for people listening to this, it's such an important element of HR, and particularly as we bring in more, analytics and technology, it's science at the end of the day. If we think back to when we did science at school, you do experiments, some of them work, some of them don't. But as you said, if they don't work, learn from it, move on. I think that's the key thing. Don't just keep trying to do it if it's not going to work. If whatever program it is you're trying to create from it. So I think some really good advice.
But if this company wasn't open to fail fast, I would have been fired a long time back.
Well, there's a good lesson for people. And as from the start, Piyush has been CHRO at Genpact for 17 years. So So Piyush, I can't believe we've already got to the end of our conversation, but this is the final question. So this is the question we're asking everyone on this series. You know, and I think you've talked to this a little bit, so you might want to summarize here at the end. What is the role of HR in helping companies plan effectively for the future of work? So I guess we did about workforce planning here a little bit, but I guess it's, I'm going to be quiet and let you talk.
Actually, David, it's to me, it's a bit broader than that. The way I would respond to that is, and I talked to it earlier as well in some ways. I think what the people agenda does is just so fundamental to delivering the company's short-term and long-term objectives. It's beyond just planning, the future of work. It's delivering to, the future of business, and that's why sometimes it's too important to leave just to the HR function. And I see it as partnership with business and the function. I don't see my function as owning the people agenda in a power equation over business. I see both of us as enablers to each other, and I think that becomes really important. What do we need to deliver on? We need to deliver on talent management. We need to deliver on change management in the organization. We need to deliver on employee experience in the organization. We need to deliver on, diversity and inclusion, DEI in the broader sense of the word. Not just ticking off numbers, but diversity of thought, diversity of action.
Yeah.
Those are the agendas which we need to co-own with the business. And in all of this is embedded engagement, in all of this is engagement culture, in all of this is embedded skilling and upskilling, which is going to become so important. In all of this is embedded purpose. So it's kind of all comes together in the future of business.
Piyush, thank you very much. A great way to finish our conversation. You and the team at Genpact are doing some incredible work, and thank you for sharing some of the insights about Amber, about Genome, about Talent Match, and all the other things that you're doing there. But I think more importantly, actually the approach that you take to HR and people management at Genpact. I think listeners are going to learn a lot from this episode. So thank you very much for being on the show. Can you let listeners know how they can keep in touch with you on social media and find out more about your work at Genpact?
Yes, absolutely. So, David, first of all, thank you so much for allowing us to share our learning and our journey. Really appreciate that. On social media, I'm on Twitter at Piyush Mehta 322, LinkedIn at Piyush Mehta. That's PIYUSHMEHTA. And as a company, you can get to know us at genpact.com and our LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook channels.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Piyush. I'm hoping I'll be in India again soon, and hopefully we'll meet in person one day. And certainly looking forward to connecting with Praful again as well. So thank you very much for being a guest on the show.
We'd love to have you over. Look forward to hosting you, David.
Thank you very much, Piyush. In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.